The Light in the Lighthouse. Complete script. Topic 1. The orphan's solitude. Have you ever felt so broken that even breathing seemed like too much to bear? This is the story of Benjamin, a young orphan fisherman who discovered that even when the storm rages hardest, God never abandons those who call out to him with honest hearts. Before we begin, if stories of faith and hope speak to your soul, stay with us through this journey. Subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love hearing from our community around the world. In a forgotten coastal village where gray waves crashed against weathered docks and salt-stained boats rocked endlessly in the harbor, there lived a young man named Benjamin. He was only 26 years old, orphaned since childhood, when fever took both his parents within days of each other. Though he had learned to work hard and survive on his own, there was a wound that never healed: the absence of family. His cottage was simple, made of weathered wood with a roof that leaked during storms, and a table almost always empty. There he spent his nights accompanied only by the echo of wind that slipped through the cracks in the walls and the relentless sound of waves against rocks. Benjamin worked as a fisherman, going out before sunrise each morning in his small weathered boat, casting nets into waters that seemed as empty as his heart. The other fishermen had families waiting at home, wives who mended their nets, and children who ran to greet them at the docks. But Benjamin returned each evening to silence, to a cold hearth and loneliness that weighed heavier than any anchor. He earned enough to survive, selling his modest catch at the market, buying bread and oil to sustain his body. But there was no sustenance for his soul. In his heart, he felt an emptiness larger than any hunger. Having no one to call mother or father, no home to return to with laughter and embraces. Every evening as the sun descended toward the horizon, Benjamin would watch the families of the village gathering together. He saw children running into their mother's arms, heard fathers laughing with their sons, smelled the rich aroma of fish stew wafting from open windows. All of it reminded him of what he never had. While others walked into homes filled with warmth and voices and belonging, he returned to his empty dwelling where shadows grew long and the only sound was the mocking rhythm of waves. It was during those darkest hours that Benjamin discovered a refuge. At the edge of the village stood an old abandoned lighthouse, its light extinguished for decades, its tower crumbling from neglect. Each night after the village settled into sleep, Benjamin climbed the spiral stairs until he reached the lamp room with its view of infinite ocean and endless sky. There, surrounded by broken glass and rusted metal, he spoke into the darkness. He spoke to God. His prayers were not elegant or rehearsed. They were raw, desperate, honest cries from a shattered heart. His voice trembled as he poured out his anguish into the night air. "Lord, do you hear me out here in this forgotten place? I'm alone, but I'm still talking to you because I don't know what else to do. My parents are gone, and I don't understand why. All I have left are these stars that seem so far away." The words came in fragments, sometimes barely whispers, sometimes anguished shouts that disappeared into the wind. He spoke of his loneliness, his desperate need to believe that somewhere beyond the darkness, someone was listening. There were nights when exhaustion overtook him, and he fell asleep right there in the lamp room, his face turned toward the heavens. In those moments, he felt something he couldn't quite explain, a presence, or simply the stubborn refusal of hope to die completely. Despite the emptiness of his days, Benjamin continued to climb those stairs night after night, convinced that even if no answer came, the act of speaking to God was keeping him alive. In that secret dialogue between a broken man and an infinite sky, Benjamin found the strength to face another day. Topic 2. The village's contempt. As weeks turned to months, Benjamin's nightly ritual became known throughout the village, and instead of inspiring sympathy, it became a source of ridicule. The other fishermen began to mock him openly. When Benjamin walked past them on the docks, they would sneer. "There goes the fool who talks to empty air in a broken tower. If God really listened to him, his nets wouldn't come back half empty every day." The women at the market whispered behind their hands, "That poor orphan has lost his mind. He should focus on real life instead of this nonsense about praying in that old lighthouse. The gossip spread like fog through the village, each retelling adding new layers of suspicion and disdain. Even the children began to taunt him, following Benjamin through the streets, calling out in sing-song voices. "Crazy Benjamin talks to the wind. Does the wind talk back, or are you just lonely?" They would giggle and run away, throwing pebbles at his back. Benjamin never responded. He would lower his head, clench his jaw, and continue walking. But each word of mockery carved deeper wounds in his already scarred heart. The isolation grew worse with each passing day. Old friends now avoided him, crossing to the other side of the street when they saw him coming. The innkeeper served him with barely concealed contempt. Even the priest seemed uncomfortable in Benjamin's presence, offering only platitudes before finding excuses to leave. The village that should have cared for an orphan now treated him as an embarrassment, a broken thing that reminded them too much of their own fragile mortality. There were nights when the weight of their judgment became almost unbearable. Benjamin would climb to his lighthouse refuge with tears already streaming down his face. Once alone, he would fall to his knees on the cold stone floor and cry out, "God, are they right? Am I just a fool talking to myself? If my parents died and left me alone, have you abandoned me too? If you're not there at all, then what's the point?" The stars would shine in their silent patterns, and Benjamin would remain there in his anguish, waiting for something to prove that his faith was not in vain. The doubt crept in like the tide, steady and relentless. The temptation to give up was stronger than ever. He thought about never climbing those stairs again, about simply existing without hope or expectation, about letting the emptiness consume him completely. But something, some small, stubborn flame in the depths of his being, refused to be extinguished. Even when his mind filled with doubt, his feet still carried him to that tower, and his voice still whispered prayers into the night. Topic 3. The breaking point. The humiliation reached its peak on a particularly harsh day. Benjamin had spent the morning at sea, his nets coming up nearly empty, yielding barely enough fish to buy bread. When he returned to the docks, a group of men were gathered near the fishmonger's stall. One of them, a burly man named Thomas, who had once been friendly, called out with cruel amusement, "Hey, Benjamin, did you ask your imaginary friend in the sky for better fishing today? Because it looks like he's not answering." Another man stepped forward, his tone almost aggressive. "Tell me something, Benjamin. When you're up in that lighthouse talking to darkness, does God ever talk back? A real man would accept reality and move on. He'd stop wasting time with superstitious nonsense." Benjamin stood there holding his meager catch, his hands gripping the rope so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at him to defend himself, but the words died in his throat. What could he say that would make any difference? Instead, he simply looked up at the gray sky, silently mouthed a prayer, and walked away with as much dignity as he could muster, while their laughter followed him. That evening, Benjamin didn't go straight to the lighthouse. He sat in his cottage staring out at the darkening sea. The weight of it all pressed down on him. The loneliness, the mockery, the endless cycle of empty nets and emptier days, the gnawing question of whether God was truly listening or if he was simply going mad. He didn't eat dinner. He didn't light a fire. He simply sat there in the gathering darkness, feeling himself sliding toward a precipice. When night fell completely, Benjamin finally walked slowly toward the lighthouse. His steps were heavy, each one requiring conscious effort. When he reached the lamp room, the cold night wind hit his face, and something inside him finally broke. He collapsed onto the stone floor and let out a cry from the very depths of his soul. "God, if you're real, if you're there at all, I need you to hear me now." His voice cracked, raw with desperation. "I can't do this anymore. I've lost everything. My parents are gone, my community despises me, my life has become a joke. I've prayed every single night, and sometimes I fear there's been nobody listening at all. Just me and the wind and the darkness." Tears streamed down his face, his whole body shaking. "I'm not asking for much, Lord. I just need to know that I'm not alone, that you haven't forgotten me like everyone else has. Please give me a sign. Show me that my faith means something, because I can't keep going on hope alone anymore. I need something real, or I don't know if I can take another day. Topic 4. The miraculous light. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind that had been howling suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie stillness. The waves that constantly crashed below fell quiet, as if the entire ocean had paused. Even the usual night sounds simply stopped. Benjamin remained on his knees, waiting in that supernatural silence. Then it happened. The ancient lighthouse lamp, dead and dark for more than 30 years, began to glow. It started as barely a flicker, so faint he almost missed it. But then it grew stronger, brighter, pulsing with a light that had no earthly source. There was no oil in the reservoir, no wick to burn, no flame of any kind. Yet the lamp blazed to life with an intensity Benjamin had never seen. The light grew until it was blindingly bright, casting rays that cut through the darkness like swords of pure illumination. Benjamin scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding, and stared in absolute wonder. The beam didn't rotate as it should have. Instead, it held steady, pointing with absolute precision toward a specific direction far out over the ocean, toward a part of the coastline he had never explored, an area fishermen avoided because of dangerous rocks. Benjamin's hands trembled as he gripped the railing. This wasn't a coincidence, wasn't exhausted perception, wasn't anything that could be explained naturally. The light was real, solid, powerful, and it was answering his desperate prayer in a way he could never have imagined. Tears continued to flow, but they were different now, no longer tears of despair, but of overwhelming awe. He fell to his knees again, this time in worship. You heard me. You actually heard me. Lord, this is your answer, this light, this sign. It's you showing me that I was never alone, that you were listening all along. He stayed there watching the miraculous light hold its steady course, feeling something shift fundamentally inside himself. The doubt that had been eating away at his faith began to fall away, replaced by a certainty so strong it felt like solid ground. This was real. God had heard his cry and had responded with light, literal, and unmistakable light that pointed the way forward. When Benjamin finally rose, he felt transformed. The exhaustion that had weighted him down lifted. The despair that had wrapped around his heart fell away. In their place surged new strength, a conviction that burned brighter than the miraculous lamp itself. He knew what he had to do. He would follow that light, no matter how dangerous or difficult the journey. He was no longer just a broken orphan mocked by his village. He was a man given a divine mission, guided by a sign from heaven itself. And with renewed purpose, Benjamin descended the stairs, already planning his journey toward whatever destiny God had revealed. Topic 5. The journey begins. Before dawn, Benjamin prepared for his journey. He packed provisions into a weathered bag, dried fish, hard bread, water, flint for fire, and a thick blanket. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. What would he say? That a dead lighthouse had blazed to life? They already thought him mad. Instead, he slipped away while the village slept, taking the coastal path that led away from the familiar docks toward whatever destiny awaited. The journey was brutal. The coastal path was treacherous, winding along cliff edges where one misstep meant death. Sharp stones cut through his worn boots, thorny bushes tore at his clothes, and the sun beat down mercilessly while nights brought bone-chilling cold. But every time doubt threatened, he would look toward the horizon and still see that distant glow, that miraculous light continuing to point the way, and he would find strength to take one more step. On the second day, when his water was nearly gone and his throat burned, Benjamin encountered an old hermit living in a cave carved into the coastal rocks. The hermit offered him water from a spring that bubbled up from the cave floor, fresh and cold and more refreshing than anything Benjamin had ever tasted. As Benjamin drank gratefully, the hermit spoke. "You are following a light that others cannot see, aren't you?" Benjamin nodded, surprised the stranger understood. The hermit smiled. "Many years ago, I was like you, lost, desperate, crying out for meaning, and God showed me this place. I thought He wanted me to live here alone forever, but now I understand. I was meant to be here for this moment, to give you water and to tell you this. When you walk by faith, not by sight, every step takes you closer to where you need to be. Don't trust what your eyes see or what your mind thinks. Trust the light that called you. Benjamin left with his flask refilled and his spirit renewed. Days later, exhausted and hungry after his provisions ran out, he collapsed beneath a gnarled tree. He thought he might die there. But then a young woman appeared carrying a basket. She approached without fear and knelt beside him. "You look like you could use some food," she said gently, uncovering her basket to reveal fresh bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Benjamin hesitated. "I have no money." The woman smiled. "I'm not asking for payment. I come this way every week to leave food for travelers. My mother taught me that when we give to those in need, we're giving to God Himself. Eat, rest, and remember. Sometimes God's greatest miracles aren't the ones that change our circumstances, but the ones that change our hearts so we can face those circumstances with courage." Late one evening, as Benjamin struggled to find shelter before darkness fell, he spotted something strange. A young boy standing on a rocky outcrop, waving urgently. Benjamin climbed toward the child. When he reached the spot, the boy pointed to a narrow cleft in the rocks. "There's a cave through there. It's dry and protected. You'll be safe for the night." Benjamin peered into the cleft and saw the boy was right. He turned to thank the child, but the boy had vanished. As he settled into the cave, Benjamin wondered if the boy had been human at all, or if God had sent an angel. Either way, he whispered thanks into the darkness. Topic 6. The Hidden Cove. After more than a week of traveling, pushing his body to its limits, Benjamin finally reached the place where the light had been pointing. He climbed one last steep hill, his legs burning, his breath ragged, but driven by certainty that he was close. When he crested that final ridge and looked down, his breath caught in his throat. Nestled between towering cliffs was a cove unlike anything Benjamin had ever seen. A crescent of white sand curved at the base of the cliffs, and beyond stretched a hidden valley, lush and green and teeming with life. Trees heavy with fruit grew in abundance, their branches bending under the weight of apples, pears, and plums. A freshwater stream cascaded down from the heights, creating clear pools before flowing into the sea. Wildflowers bloomed in riots of color, and birds sang from the branches. But that wasn't all. As Benjamin scrambled down toward this paradise, he discovered scattered wooden crates along the beach, clearly from a shipwreck, their contents miraculously preserved. When he pried open the first crate, he found it filled with fishing nets of the finest quality he had ever seen. Another crate contained tools, hammers, saws, chisels, all carefully wrapped. A third held sacks of seeds, wheat and vegetables, and herbs, still viable for planting. Benjamin fell to his knees in the sand, overwhelmed. This wasn't just a beautiful place, it was a complete answer to prayer. He pressed his face into his hands and wept. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for hearing me, for guiding me, for showing me that my faith wasn't foolish. You didn't just save me from despair, you've given me something to share. This isn't just for me, is it? This is for everyone." He stayed on that beach for a long time, letting reality sink in. The cove offered everything a community could need: fresh water, fertile soil, abundant fruit, and tools from the providential shipwreck. The cliffs protected it from storms, the bay was calm for fishing, and the valley had space for building homes and planting crops. This could support not just one person, but dozens, maybe hundreds. It could transform the lives of everyone in his village, those same people who had mocked him. And despite their cruelty, Benjamin felt no desire for revenge. Instead, his heart filled with compassion. He had to return and tell them. He had to share this blessing. As the sun set, painting the cove in gold and amber, Benjamin stood and looked back toward the direction he had come from. The journey back would be just as difficult, but now he traveled with purpose beyond his own needs. He traveled with good news, with hope, With proof that faith rewarded is faith vindicated. With one last look at the miracle God had led him to discover, Benjamin began the trek back to his village. Topic 7. The Return and Rejection. Benjamin arrived back at the village after 3 more days of hard travel, his clothes torn and dirty, his face weathered, but his eyes burning with intensity. He went straight to the village square and began to tell them what he had discovered. His voice rang out clear and strong. "Listen to me. I found something beyond belief, a hidden cove with fresh water and fruit trees and everything we need to build a new life. God showed it to me through the lighthouse. He answered my prayers with a light that guided me there." The reaction was immediate and brutal. Laughter erupted, harsh and mocking. Thomas pushed his way forward with a sneer. "Now I've heard everything. The crazy orphan wants us to believe that a broken lighthouse lit up by magic and led him to some fantasy paradise. Tell me, Benjamin, did you also see mermaids while you were having your hallucinations?" The crowd roared with laughter. A woman's voice cut through. "You can't accept reality, so you've invented this story to make yourself feel important. But you're not a prophet, Benjamin. You're just a lonely orphan who's lost his grip on reality." Others joined in. "If this magical cove really exists, why hasn't anyone else ever found it? Why would God show you anything when you can't even catch enough fish to feed yourself?" Benjamin stood there taking their assault, but he refused to be deterred. He raised his voice. "I know how this sounds. I know you think I've gone mad, but I'm telling you the truth. This place is real, and it's big enough for all of us. Our village is dying, you all know it. The fishing gets worse every year. Half our young people have already left. But I've found something that could save us if you just trust me enough to follow." For a moment, the mockery quieted as the truth about the village's decline settled over the crowd. But then Thomas spoke again, dripping with scorn. "And why should we trust you, Benjamin? You're a failure as a fisherman. You've spent years talking to yourself in an abandoned lighthouse, and now you want us to follow you into the wilderness based on some vision? We'd be fools." The crowd murmured agreement. Benjamin felt his heart sinking. He was about to turn away when he heard a different voice. "Wait!" An elderly fisherman named William pushed through the crowd, leaning on a walking stick. He was the oldest man in the village, respected for his years. He looked at Benjamin. "I remember your father, Benjamin, and your grandfather. Good men, honest men, not given to lies. And I remember you before loneliness broke you, when you were steady and reliable." He turned to the crowd. "We're quick to mock this young man, but what has our mockery gotten us? We're starving slowly in this dying village. I'm old. I've got little to lose. If you say there's hope to be found, Benjamin, I'm willing to follow and see for myself." His words created a ripple effect. A woman holding a thin child stepped forward. "My baby needs more than I can give her here. If there's even a chance of something better, I have to try." A young couple followed, then another family, then several more. Not everyone, but a group of perhaps 30 people who were desperate enough or faithful enough to take a chance on Benjamin's story. Benjamin looked at the group and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had told them the truth, but now he had to lead them there safely. As he began organizing the group for the journey, he offered one more silent prayer. "Lord, I've done what you asked. Now please give me the strength to lead them safely to what you've shown me." Topic 8. The Difficult Trek. The journey with 30 people was far harder than Benjamin's solo trek. What he had covered in a week took nearly 3 weeks with children, elderly, and people unaccustomed to rough travel. Benjamin led the way, constantly helping the elderly over difficult passages, carrying exhausted children when parents were too weary. The group faced the same brutal conditions: scorching sun, freezing nights, limited water, dwindling food. Doubt crept in among the travelers. After the first week, some began to question their decision. "How much farther is this paradise?" they would ask each evening. "Are you sure you remember the way? What if it was all a fever dream and we're walking to our deaths?" Benjamin could only reassure them, share his provisions when others ran out, and pray constantly. The hermit's cave provided crucial respite. When they reached it, the old man emerged and began drawing water from his spring for everyone. He spoke briefly to the group. "This young man passed through here following faith alone. Some of you follow him out of desperation, some out of curiosity, some out of genuine belief. Your reasons don't matter. What matters is that you keep going even when you don't understand why. The greatest tests come just before the greatest rewards." When they reached the area where Benjamin had met the generous woman, he looked for her, hoping she might provide provisions. But she was nowhere to be found. The group grew anxious, hunger gnawing at everyone. That evening, Benjamin prayed aloud, "Lord, we need your help. Feed these people who trusted you enough to follow." The next morning, they woke to find dozens of fish washed up on the beach, fresh and perfect. It was enough for 2 days, and even the skeptics fell silent, unable to explain what they had witnessed. If you're still with us, listening to this story and feeling something stir in your heart, maybe it's time to reflect on your own journey. Sometimes we walk through darkness, not knowing if anyone hears our cries, but perhaps we're being led somewhere we can't yet see. The final days were hardest. The terrain grew more difficult, the path steeper and more dangerous. 2 families turned back, but the rest pressed on. Old William stumbled and nearly fell off a cliff edge, saved only by Benjamin's quick reflexes. A child fell ill with fever, and her mother wept, thinking they had brought her daughter to die. But the fever broke after a night of the entire group praying over her. Finally, after 3 exhausting weeks, Benjamin led the group up the final hill. He could see the doubt in their faces, the unspoken question of whether they had followed a madman's delusion. His own heart pounded with sudden fear. What if he couldn't find it again? But then they crested the ridge, and Benjamin heard the collective gasp as 30 people saw what he had seen. The hidden cove, the pristine beach, the lush valley, the cascading stream, the fruit-laden trees. Old William fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "It's real. God in heaven, it's all real." The young mother clutched her child and sobbed with relief. And slowly, one by one, the entire group began to kneel, their voices rising in spontaneous prayer and thanksgiving. Topic 9. The Transformation. The group descended into the hidden cove with awe. As they explored, their wonder only grew. The stream provided drinking water and pools for bathing. The fruit trees bore varieties they recognized, and some they'd never seen, all ripe and sweet. The valley had rich soil perfect for planting. And the salvaged crates provided everything else: tools, nets, supplies. Within days, they had established camp and begun organizing their community. Benjamin naturally became their leader, though he accepted the role with humility. He helped organize work teams, some to build shelters, others to establish gardens, others to fish using the providential nets. Old William's experience proved invaluable. The cove's bay teemed with fish, and every net came up full. But the transformation wasn't just physical. Something deeper was changing in the hearts of those who had made the journey. People who had been bitter and cynical found themselves filled with gratitude. Families who had barely spoken before now worked together. The mockery that had poisoned their old community was replaced by cooperation and kindness. At the center was the understanding that they had witnessed genuine miracles. Each evening, as the sun set, the group would gather, and someone would tell the story again of how they came to be there. They never tired of recounting Benjamin's faith in climbing that lighthouse night after night, the miraculous light that answered his prayer, the difficult journey, and the reward at the end. And each time, Benjamin would redirect their praise. "It wasn't me. I was just a broken orphan crying out in darkness. It was God who heard and answered. I was simply willing to follow when he showed the way." Word of the hidden cove eventually reached the original village. When Thomas and others heard about the abundance, some felt regret for their mockery. A few families made the journey to join the new community, humbled and seeking forgiveness. Benjamin welcomed them without judgment. The new community prospered beyond material abundance. Crime and conflict were virtually non-existent because people had learned they needed each other and needed to remain humble before the God who had blessed them. Children grew up hearing the story, learning that faith, even when tested and mocked, can move mountains. The cove became known among sailors as a place of refuge, and those who stopped there left with full bellies and hearts touched by testimony. For Benjamin personally, the transformation was profound. The loneliness that had consumed him didn't disappear entirely. He still missed his parents, and always would, but it no longer defined him. He had discovered that God had a purpose for his life beyond his personal happiness, that his suffering had prepared him to lead others through darkness into light. He married eventually to a woman from the group who understood his past and shared his faith, and together they helped build a community founded on faith, hope, and love. The old lighthouse back in the original village became legend. Some claimed it still lit up on certain nights, pointing the way for others who needed guidance. Benjamin went back once, climbing those familiar stairs to the lamp room. The mechanism was still broken, the lamp still cold and dark, with no physical explanation for how it had blazed to life. He stood there remembering the man he had been, broken and alone, and thanking God for the man he had become, whole and purposeful. Topic 10. The Legacy of Faith. Years passed, and the Hidden Cove community grew from 30 people to over 200. They built proper homes, established farms and orchards, developed a fishing fleet. The original settlers became elders who passed down the founding story, making sure no one would forget how they came to this place of blessing. A small chapel was built overlooking the cove, and every Sunday the community gathered to worship the God who had heard one orphan's desperate prayer and answered beyond all imagining. Benjamin lived to be an old man, respected and loved by everyone. In his final years, he would sit on the beach and watch the children play in the waves, the fishing boats returning with full nets, the families working together, and his heart would fill with profound gratitude. He never forgot what old William had told him once. Benjamin, you thought God abandoned you when your parents died, but he was actually preparing you for something greater than a comfortable life. He was making you into someone who could lead others out of darkness. The story spread beyond the cove, told and retold by travelers. It became a testament to the power of persistent faith, proof that God hears every prayer, even those spoken in the darkest moments by the most broken hearts. Young people from other villages would sometimes make pilgrimages, seeking to understand how such transformation happened, and the community would welcome them and tell them the same thing Benjamin had discovered. God never abandons those who seek him with honest hearts. When Benjamin finally passed away, the entire community mourned, but they celebrated his life more than they grieved his death. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the cove, with a simple stone marker that read, "Benjamin, who taught us to keep praying even when the night seems endless, because God always answers, always guides, always provides." The legacy of Benjamin's journey lived on through generations. Parents would take their children to the chapel and tell them the story about a young orphan whose parents died, who was mocked for his faith, who climbed a broken lighthouse to pray to a God he feared might not be listening, and how that God responded with a miracle so undeniable that it changed not just one life, but hundreds. They taught their children that sometimes the darkest moments are just before God reveals his greatest plans, that suffering can have purpose we don't yet understand, and that faith that persists through doubt and mockery and pain can literally lead to promised lands. The story of Benjamin and the lighthouse became more than history for the community. It became their identity. When they faced challenges, droughts or storms or conflicts, someone would always remind everyone. Remember Benjamin in the lighthouse. Remember that God heard his prayer even when it seemed impossible. He'll hear ours too. And they would pray together, work together, and trust that the same God who guided their founder would continue to guide them. If this story has stirred something in your soul, if you've seen yourself in Benjamin's struggles or felt the echo of his prayers in your own heart, don't let this moment pass without response. The community here, in this digital space where we share stories of faith and hope, is waiting to hear from you. Tell us about your own lighthouse moments, those times when you cried out in darkness and waited for an answer. Share what this story meant to you, or tell someone else who needs to hear that their prayers aren't falling on deaf ears. Subscribe to join us on this journey, because every story of faith deserves to be heard, and every testimony of God's faithfulness deserves to be shared. Your comment, your story, your simple "I needed to hear this" might be exactly what someone else needs to keep climbing their own lighthouse stairs night after night, believing that dawn will come. The truth that Benjamin discovered in his darkest hour remains true for all of us. God never abandons those who seek him. Even when the night seems endless, even when everyone mocks our faith, even when we can barely whisper another prayer through our tears, he is there. He is listening. And at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way, he will light up the darkness and show us the path forward. We just have to keep praying, keep believing, keep climbing those stairs one more night. Thank you for staying with us through Benjamin's entire journey. May his story remind you that your faith is never foolish, your prayers are never wasted, and your darkest night may be just before God reveals his most beautiful dawn. Word count: 3,198 words.